I still remember the sound of his glass hitting the side of that champagne bottle. Sharp, celebratory, obnoxious. Harold stood in the middle of that expensive lakeside restaurant, surrounded by his friends, toasting loudly enough for the entire dining room to hear. "To freedom," he announced. "To being done with the dead weight of my past." He meant me. His wife of 28 years. The woman who had loved him through illnesses, failures, job losses, addictions, and more sleepless nights than I could count. I stood at the entrance, unnoticed for a moment, watching him lift that glass with a grin so smug it looked permanently carved into his face. He looked reborn, free, vibrant, as if shedding me had added 20 years back onto his life. Our divorce had finalized 3 days earlier. He strutted around the restaurant like he had accomplished something noble, like he had escaped captivity, like I had been the burden that held him down. His friends, people who had sat at my table, eaten my food, and confided in me their own failures, laughed along with him. They clinked their glasses as if they had all earned martyrdom. I should have left. I should have turned around and walked out. But I didn't. I walked right up to the bar, ordered a coffee, and sat where I could hear every word but remain outside his line of sight. I didn't want to confront him. I didn't want to humiliate him. Not then. I just wanted to understand. To listen. To see what kind of man he was now that he believed he owed me nothing. He boasted about his new start. He bragged about finally having his accounts sorted. He joked about no more nagging. He even mentioned a woman I had never heard of before, some breath of fresh air named Karina. Each sentence tightened something inside my chest, but I stayed silent and still. And then, right in the middle of his triumphant speech, Harold's phone lit up on the table. He glanced down casually, then frowned, then answered. "This is Harold." Silence. A long one. Too long. His face strained. His posture folded inward. His hand trembled slightly as he lowered the phone. His accountant had just informed him that the court-ordered settlement, $212, for 86.73, had been approved, processed, and transferred directly to me. The room didn't go quiet. But Harold did. All that bravado evaporated in seconds. His friends stared. He swallowed hard. Then he said the words I will never forget. "She won." He wasn't talking about money. He was talking about the truth. I didn't approach him. I didn't say a thing. I simply finished my coffee and walked out. Revenge didn't require a scene. It didn't require shouting. It didn't require his humiliation. It required only documentation, patience, and the steady hand of justice that he had sworn would never touch him. But to understand how I reached that moment, to understand why that phone call destroyed him, you need to know who I am. And what he did. Because the real betrayal hadn't happened during the divorce. It had started years before, buried under layers of love, duty, and denial. My name is Margaret Ellison, and I am 67 years old. I say that proudly. I've lived enough life to understand that aging isn't a slow fade into irrelevance. It's the sharpening of every instinct, every insight, every quiet truth you ignored in your youth. I grew up in a small town in eastern Michigan. My father was a machinist, my mother a school librarian. They raised me on the values of patience, diligence, discretion, and, most importantly, self-respect. And perhaps that was why Harold fascinated me from the moment we met. He was the opposite of quiet. Loud, charismatic, endlessly improvising his life like it was a performance he believed he could charm his way out of at any moment. I met him at 29 during a charity gala for the regional hospital. He had already polished the skill of looking deeply into someone's eyes while revealing absolutely nothing of himself. I mistook that for confidence, for depth, for mystery. We married within a year. Through our 28 years together, I built a stable life. I worked as a financial analyst, nothing flashy, but consistent. I handled our bills, our insurance, our taxes, our investments. I thought Harold appreciated that. I thought he understood structure, even if he couldn't create it himself. But Harold had always been a man who wanted the appearance of stability without the responsibility of maintaining it. The kind of man who believed trust was earned once and then owed indefinitely. Years later, I would learn how he took advantage of that trust. Quietly. Repeatedly. And with a confidence so casual it bordered on cruelty. But before the betrayal, before the unraveling of everything I believed our marriage to be, there was a long stretch of ordinary life. Comfortable. Predictable. Almost warm. We raised my niece for several years after my sister's accident. We hosted holidays. We survived a recession. We buried his father. I helped him through his health scare at 51 when a minor heart attack forced him into a calmer lifestyle. Or so I thought. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't often appear as a dramatic event. More often, it's a slow drip. A subtle shift. A tone you can't quite name. A conversation you replay later with a sinking feeling that something was off. At 62, I began noticing these small fractures, minor inconsistencies, vague explanations, unusual expenses. But Harold always had an answer. Always had a smile. Always had just enough affection to soften my concerns. I ignored more than I should have. Not because I was weak. But because love, especially long-term love, creates habits. And habits create a kind of blindness. But here's the thing age teaches you. The truth always waits. It never disappears. It simply builds interest. And when it came due, Harold paid every penny. The first rayol crack appeared during a family gathering, a moment so small it seemed harmless. But it was the beginning of the end. My family had always admired Harold in the uncomplicated way people admire a man who performs charm as if it were a civic duty. My niece Anna, who lived with us from age 7 to 14, thought he was hilarious. My sister, before she passed, used to say he could sell rain to a drowning man. Even my father, a man suspicious of every silver tongue he ever met, had taken a liking to him. But admiration is not the same as intimacy, and charm is not the same as character. One Sunday afternoon, about 5 years before our divorce, the whole family gathered at our house for my husband's 58th birthday. A simple celebration. Pot roast. Lemon cake. My cousin's kids running around the backyard. Nothing extraordinary. And yet that day held the first hairline fracture in the foundation of our marriage, though I didn't recognize it until much later. Harold had always handled the grilling. It made him feel important in a way that was harmless, his self-appointed kingdom of steaks and marinades. But that afternoon, when my niece asked him about a weekend trip he had supposedly taken with coworkers, he froze mid-sentence. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Most people didn't notice. But at 62, you learn to read silences the way younger people read expressions. He recovered quickly. Smiled. Gave a story that felt just a beat too polished, too rehearsed. It wasn't the answer that unsettled me. It was the flicker of calculation behind his eyes. Later that evening, my brother pulled me aside in the kitchen while we cleaned dishes. "Is Harold doing all right?" he asked, brows drawn. I laughed. "What makes you think he isn't?" "He seems busy. Secretive, maybe." He shrugged. "Just a vibe." I dismissed it. Families often sense ghosts where there are only shadows. But shadows do mean something. Not immediately. But eventually. In the following months, small inconsistencies began accumulating like dust in corners I rarely checked. New credit card statements. A withdrawal I didn't remember approving. A late payment charge on a bill I hadn't seen. Harold always had explanations. The bank made an error. He had paid something in cash. He forgot to tell me about a work expense. He said these things with such ease, such practiced confidence, that I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Because it was easier to soothe worry than confront the possibility of betrayal. And because we were still, in many ways, a functional family. Holidays. Visits with my niece. Dinner with neighbors. Sunday breakfasts, just the two of us. A life built slowly, maintained quietly. But suspicion once awakened never fully falls asleep again. It simply watches. And one evening, that watchfulness paid off. Because my niece, now grown, came to visit. And she brought with her a story, an innocent, offhand remark, that would unravel everything I thought I knew about the man I'd married. Anna had seen Harold somewhere he should never have been, with someone he should never have known, and she didn't realize the weight of what she'd said. Anna arrived on a rainy Thursday evening, her coat dripping on my foyer tile. She hugged me tightly, told me she missed me, and we curled up on the couch with tea, catching up on the quiet details of life. Halfway through the conversation, while telling me about a work conference she had attended at a riverside hotel, she mentioned something so casually it almost slipped past me. "Oh, and you'll laugh," she said. "I thought I saw Uncle Harold there. But when I waved, he turned away so fast I figured it couldn't be him." He had told me he was on a business trip in Chicago that weekend. Still, I didn't jump to conclusions. I simply nodded. But inside, something shifted. Memory rearranged itself. Timelines tightened. Numbers aligned into troubling patterns. When Harold returned from that supposed Chicago trip, he came home with no receipts, no stories, barely any details at all. He claimed he was exhausted. Now I knew why. Over the next months, I began quietly reviewing our accounts. Every line, every statement, every harmless charge he'd brushed off. The picture came together slowly but unmistakably. Harold had been siphoning money, small amounts at first, then larger ones, into a private account I'd never known existed. He'd also taken out a personal loan under our jointly owned home as collateral. I found hotel charges, restaurant bills, transfers, and something else. Payments to a woman named Karina Delmont. Her name appeared 3 times before Harold realized I had started looking at everything too closely and abruptly changed the passwords on several accounts. He told me it was for security. He didn't realize I had already documented everything. Printed statements, screenshots, notes, a timeline, a pattern. He also didn't realize that the loan he'd taken out, $78,000 secured against our home, had a clause he had violated by moving funds into an undisclosed account. One evening, when I confronted him gently, calmly, asking for transparency, he erupted. He accused me of paranoia. He said I was spying. He claimed I was making up stories because I was bored. Then he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the living room mirror rattled. He didn't come home for 3 days. When he returned, he announced he wanted a divorce. Not a discussion. Not counseling. Just an exit. And he assumed, confidently, foolishly, that marital assets could be neatly severed, that I would walk away quietly, that my age meant I would accept whatever he offered out of exhaustion. He didn't understand me at all. Because betrayal, once uncovered, doesn't make you weak. It makes you extraordinarily clear. And clarity guided me straight to the lawyer who would help expose every financial trail Harold thought he had buried. I chose my attorney with precision. A woman named Judith Marks, 61, sharp-eyed, with a voice as steady as a metronome. She'd specialized in marital financial disputes for 30 years. When I handed her my folder of documents, tabbed, highlighted, cross-referenced, she scanned through them with increasing interest. After 20 minutes, she closed the file, folded her hands, and said, "Margaret, this isn't just marital misconduct. This is financial fraud." I felt no triumph. Just a quiet exhale, the kind you release when a suspicion finally becomes a truth you can no longer ignore. Judith began the investigation immediately. Subpoenas for all joint and individual accounts. A forensic accountant to trace transfers. A request for records from the hotel where Anna had seen him. A search for any loans, liens, or undisclosed assets. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had imagined. Harold had been funding a separate life, one he'd been building for nearly 4 years. Karina wasn't just a woman he was seeing. She was his business partner in a speculative real estate project he had hidden from me. He had used marital assets to bankroll her. He had used our home to secure loans. He had lied on several bank applications. And he had not declared any of it in our preliminary divorce paperwork. In the state of Michigan, that is a catastrophic mistake. Judith crafted a plan with a surgical calmness that felt almost like reassurance. We're going to document everything, she told me. We're going to stay silent. And when the time comes, we will let him hang himself with his own omissions. Weeks passed. Then months. I lived quietly, saying little, observing everything. Harold acted as though the divorce would be simple, quick, and tidy. He became increasingly smug, so sure that charm would work on the legal system the way it worked on dinner parties. But charm dissolves under scrutiny. Every time he submitted a statement, Judith compared it to our evidence. Every time he lied, we let him. Every omission, every misrepresentation, every attempt to minimize assets, we documented it meticulously. When the court date approached, Judith handed me the final binder of evidence. It was thick, heavy, full of his own fingerprints. She tapped the cover gently. Margaret, this is the rope he tied. All we're doing is handing it to the judge. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to feel something like strength. Not vengeance. Not anger. Clarity. Resolve. Purpose. But the true turning point didn't happen in the courtroom. It happened the night before, when Harold tried one last attempt to intimidate me back into silence. The night before our hearing, Harold showed up at my door unannounced. It was nearly 9 p.m., and I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing Judith's notes when the knock startled me. He stepped inside without waiting to be invited. His expression was that practiced mixture of pity and superiority he used whenever he wanted me to feel small. I think, he began slowly, that you're dragging this out for no reason. We don't need lawyers. We don't need court. Let's just handle this like adults. He paced the room as though rehearsing a speech. I remained seated. I'll give you the retirement account, he continued. We'll split the house sale. I'll take the debts. You'll take the savings. It'll be easy. Clean. He paused, leaning toward me. And we don't need to bring up every little misunderstanding. Ah, there it was. The flicker of threat dressed as generosity. He thought I had nothing. He thought I was frightened. He thought, at 67, I would choose peace over truth. I closed the folder gently and looked up at him. Harold, I said softly, there's something you've never understood about me. He waited. I don't avoid conflict. I avoid chaos. And you, I tapped the binder, have created nothing but chaos. His face shifted. First confusion. Then annoyance. Then a flash of fear he tried to mask but couldn't. What have you done, Margaret? I've simply told the truth, I said. And tomorrow, you'll have to do the same. He exhaled sharply, turning away, muttering something under his breath about vindictive old women. Then he slammed the door on his way out. But I didn't feel shaken. Or lonely. Or uncertain. For the first time in a long marriage, I felt aligned with myself. The next morning in court, Harold walked in looking polished, confident, expectant. He still believed the world revolved around his narrative. But when Judith presented the binder, page after page of documented transfers, concealed accounts, fraudulent applications, undeclared partnerships, his confidence shattered. He seemed to shrink in the witness chair. By the time the forensic accountant testified, Harold's face had gone pale. The judge, a stern woman in her 70s, asked, "Mr. Ellison, do you realize the severity of what you've done?" Harold couldn't answer. His mouth opened, but no sound came. That was the turning point. That was when he finally understood that charm cannot rewrite facts. But the consequences that followed would be far more devastating to him than he expected. Because silence, not rage, is what destroys men like Harold. The judge's ruling was firm, decisive, and rooted entirely in Harold's own documented misconduct. He was ordered to repay marital funds diverted without consent. He was held responsible for the loan taken against our home. He was required to compensate me for financial damages. He lost claim to the majority of our shared assets. He was sanctioned for failing to disclose accounts. He was referred for review for potential fraud charges, dependent on further investigation. The total he owed, $212,486.73. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I sat with my hands folded, calm. Harold, however, crumbled. Outside the courtroom, he paced frantically, calling his accountant, arguing with someone, likely Karina, on the phone. His voice grew louder, then brittle, then broken. "Don't you understand?" he shouted at one point. "She took everything. But I hadn't taken anything." He had simply lost what he'd tried to steal. The real downfall came in the weeks after. The real estate project collapsed. Karina vanished, cutting ties the moment his finances imploded. The bank flagged his loan violations. His business partners withdrew. His friends avoided him. His reputation eroded swiftly, quietly, with the efficiency of erosion over stone. And he blamed me for all of it. But blame changes nothing. Men like Harold don't implode through confrontation. They implode when the illusions they built finally meet reality. Which brings us back to that lakeside restaurant. That foolish toast. That smug grin. That moment of triumph built on denial. And the phone call that delivered the truth to him with surgical precision. But while his downfall played out publicly, my healing unfolded privately. And it was quieter, deeper, and far more meaningful than any victory over him could ever be. After the settlement was finalized, I moved into a small but bright home near the river. 2 bedrooms. A garden. Windows that opened easily, something Harold never bothered to fix in our old house. I spent mornings walking by the water. Afternoons reading. Evenings on the porch with a cup of tea. There was a stillness in my life I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. Friends asked if I felt vindicated. Vindication is loud. Healing is quiet. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt restored. Anna visited often. My brother helped me plant new rose bushes. Neighbors invited me for dinners. Life reshaped itself in gentle ways. I no longer replayed arguments in my mind. No longer questioned my memory. No longer doubted my instincts. The noise Harold brought into my life, his lies, his evasions, his inconsistencies, had been replaced by clarity. And with clarity came peace. One afternoon, sitting on my porch while rain tapped softly on the roof, I realized I didn't think about the betrayal anymore. Not with anger. Not with hurt. Only with understanding. Not of him, but of myself. Because I had survived something heavy. And I had done it with dignity. Without retaliation. Without cruelty. Without lowering myself to the chaos he lived in. He had toasted to freedom. But I was the one who had earned it. And what I learned, what I want others to understand, became the moral I now carry like a lighthouse in the dark. If there is one truth I've learned at 67, it is this. People show you who they are in the small moments long before the big betrayals ever surface. Pay attention to the pauses. To the inconsistencies. To the stories that don't align. To the silences that feel heavy. To the charm that asks you not to look too closely. Revenge does not require cruelty. Justice does not require rage. Strength does not require shouting. All you need is the truth. And the patience to let it work. Harold believed freedom came from discarding responsibility. But real freedom comes from reclaiming your integrity. He toasted to his escape. But I am the one who walked away unburdened. If you're listening to this and find yourself in the early shadows of doubt, trust your instincts. You are not imagining the cracks. You are noticing them. And if you are older, like me, know this. Your age is not a limitation. It is an advantage. It is the sum of every intuition, every quiet warning, Every lesson life has carved into you. Use it. Stand tall. Stay calm. Gather your facts. Document everything. And when the time comes, speak your truth clearly and without fear. Because justice, when earned with patience and clarity, doesn't just restore what was taken. It gives you back yourself.